Hi guys, I hope you guys are fine and you have had an amazing month. Karibu sana tunawiri. Truth be told, we are actually coming to the end of this book. Nehemiah has been a long book and we hope that God has in one way or another helped you to learn more about him as we journeyed through this book. And here we are. Chapter 13 is where we come today and we are happy that you join us. Thank you for those of you who've managed to watch us and who've managed to comment and share this link. I pray that God will continue to bless you and guide you and cause you to know him more. So, Pastor Madenge, karibu sana to the show.
Asante, man.
I know it's been like a long 13 weeks.
Yes.
Just going through this book.
We have labored through this book.
Yeah.
You guys have labored with us, so we thank God for that.
Yeah.
And I think we can delve right into chapter 13. This
Yeah.
is the end of the book of Nehemiah.
We are at the tail end of it.
Yes, and some other people actually say this is the end of the Old Testament. Because presumably this was the last thing that was recorded in the events of the Old Testament before the coming of Jesus Christ. So I know chronologically it does not look like that because there is it the book of Malachi at the very end.
Yeah.
But it is actually believed that the end chapters of, the end of chapter 13 was actually the very last recorded event in terms of the Old Testament message.
That's quite
So this is a
interesting
historic moment.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And probably it gives us like a preamble of what will happen
Of
later
what will
on.
happen in the New Testament.
That's good.
Yes.
That's good. So we
All
can just
right.
delve in the book of this book, chapter 13.
Yep.
We will read from verses 1 to 30. This is what the word of the Lord say. On that day, the book of Moses was read aloud in the hearing of the people, and there it was found that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever be admitted into the assembly of God, because they had not met the Israelites with food and water, but had hired Balaam to call a curse down on them. Our God, however, turned the curse into a blessing. When the people heard this law, they excluded from Israel all who were of foreign descent. Before this, Eliashib the priest had been put in charge of the storerooms of the house of our God. He was closely associated with Tobiah, and he had provided him with a large room formerly used to store the grain offerings and incense and temple articles, and also the tithes of grain, new wine, and oil prescribed for the Levites, singers, and gatekeepers, as well as the contributions for the priests. But while all this was going on, I was not in Jerusalem, for in the 32nd year of King Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I had returned to the king. Sometime later, I asked his permission and came back to Jerusalem. Here I learned about the evil thing Eliashib had done in providing Tobiah a room in the courts of the house of God. I was greatly displeased and threw all Tobiah's household goods out of the room. I gave orders to purify the rooms, and then I put back into them the equipment of the house of God with the grain offerings and the incense. I also learned that the portions assigned to the Levites had not been given to them, and that all the Levites and singers responsible for the service had gone back to their own fields. So I rebuked the officials and asked them, "Why is the house of God neglected?" Then I called them together and stationed them at their posts. All Judah brought their tithes of grain, new wine, and oil into the storerooms. I put Shelemiah the priest, Zadok the scribe, and a Levite named Pedaiah in charge of the storerooms, and made Hanan, son of Zaccur, and son of Mattaniah their assistant. Because these men were considered trustworthy, they were made responsible for distributing the supplies to their brothers. Remember me for this, O my God, and do not blot out what I have so faithfully done for the house of my God and its services. In those days, I saw men in Judah trending wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing in grain and loading it on donkeys, together with wine, grapes, figs, and all other kinds of loads. And they were bringing all this into Jerusalem on the Sabbath. Therefore I warned them against selling food on that day. Men from Tyre who lived in Jerusalem were bringing in fish and all kinds of merchandise and selling them in Jerusalem on the Sabbath to the people of Judah. I rebuked the nobles of Judah and said to them, "What is this wicked thing you are doing, desecrating the Sabbath day? Didn't your forefathers do the same things, so that our God brought all the calamity upon us and upon this city? Now you are stirring up more wrath against Israel by desecrating the Sabbath. When evening shadows fell on the gates of Jerusalem before the Sabbath, I ordered the doors to be shut and not opened until the Sabbath was over. I stationed some of my own men at the gates so that no load could be brought in on the Sabbath day. Once or twice, the merchants and sellers of all kinds of goods spent the night outside Jerusalem. But I warned them and said, "Why do you spend the night by the wall? If you do this again, I will lay hands on you." From that time on, they no longer came on the Sabbath. Then I commanded the Levites to purify themselves and go and guard the gates in order to keep the Sabbath day holy. Remember me for this also, O my God, and show mercy to me according to your great love. Moreover, in those days I saw men of Judah who had married women from Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. Half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod, or the language of one of the other peoples, and did not know how to speak the language of Judah. I rebuked them and called curses down on them. I bet some of the men and pulled out their hair. I made them take an oath in God's name and said, "You are not to give your daughters in marriage to their sons, nor are you to take their daughters in marriage for your sons or for yourselves." Was it not because of marriages like this that Solomon, king of Israel, sinned? Among the many nations, there were no king like him. He was loved by his God, and God made him king over all Israel. But even when he was led into sin by foreign women. But we hear now that you too are doing all this terrible wickedness and are unfaithful to our God by marrying foreign women. One of the sons of Joiada, son of Eliashib, the high priest, was son-in-law to Sanballat, the Horonite, and I drove him away from me. Remember me, O my God, because they defiled the priestly office and the covenant of the priesthood and of the Levites. So I purified the priests and the Levites of everything foreign and assigned them duties each to his own task. I also made provisions for contributions of wood at designated times and for the first fruits. Remember me with favor, O my God. And that is the word of the Lord.
Praise be to God.
Amen.
It is interesting that we are coming to the end of this chapter.
Yeah.
And as we say, this is just before the 400 years that would lead us to the New Testament. And it is not a celebratory tone. We are not jumping up and down with joy because last week we talked about how the dedication of the temple and the walls has happened, and there was such great celebration, and guys were celebrating. And then chapter 13 doesn't end with the same celebration.
It's like an anticlimax.
It doesn't feel like, and they lived happily ever after.
Yeah.
It almost feels as if it's a downer. So let's just observe some of the things we see here before we can make sense of them going forward. One of the things I observed as you were reading out is verse 13 almost starts as if it is present day, and then takes us a bit while back. Nehemiah is not in Jerusalem. So things are happening in Jerusalem, and then he comes back to Jerusalem, and he finds that, the kind of things I did here, almost as if have been eroded, and guys are back to their former selves. Yeah. So he had taken time to go to, after 13, so he has been governor in Jerusalem for 13 years. Then he takes a break. Maybe a Nia or something of the sort goes back to King Artaxerxes in the citadel of Susa. Perhaps to report about how Jerusalem has been doing, or, administrative things. And then he comes back to Jerusalem, and the first thing he finds, shocker. All these things that he had done almost have been eroded and taken back. It begins with, on that day, the book of the law was read, and they discovered that there should be no Ammonite who is in the assembly of the people of God. However, he discovered there is an Ammonite who is not only among the people of God, but is in the very central place.
Living right in a large room in the
in the house of God. Recover Holy of Holies, and he is stationing himself next. In the very heart of Jerusalem, in the very heart of the worship of people, of the people of God. And this guy is Tobiah.
this
That-
specific guy happens to be Tobiah. What
The-
a great coincidence.
The same guy who had opposed the building of the
Yeah,
of the
from
walls
day one.
of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
He was his opponent and had actually opposed everything that Nehemiah had. You remember one of the statements he made was, even if a fox walks on the wall will crumble.
Yeah.
He was such a discouragement to the people of God. And now he has an apartment building
Yeah.
in the most luxurious of all buildings
Yeah.
in
the most
Judah.
sacred,
The most
and holy of places.
Yes.
Right there. In the
He
temple.
has a large room
Yeah.
in the middle of. So I think that's one of the things we observe there.
Yeah.
That is extremely shocking. And then the other shocking thing we find out is that he's closely related with the high priest. So the high priest who is supposed to observe the worship of God, who, when they were building the wall and everything, he was in the middle of it.
Yeah.
In fact, chapter 3, when Nehemiah wants to start building,
Yeah.
Eliashib is one of the guys that is mentioned. Eliashib and the priest started building the walls due on what side? He is closely related with the Tobiah that was opposing the work of God.
Yeah.
More so, he is the one who actually gave Tobiah a room inside the temple. How sad and devastating that was.
True.
Yeah, even for
True.
Nehemiah.
I think the other thing we see is that, first of all, this guy is definitely shocked by. We see a theme of him being angry and what
Yeah.
in the world is really, really happening
Yeah.
here. But the other thing we see is that there is a total neglect of the temple.
Yeah.
We see the Levites, first of all, they're not sorted out. They do
Yeah.
not have food. Their storehouses probably are empty. And they decide, you know what? Let's go back to our fields. Let's go and try and fend for ourselves.
In fact, it says all the Levites and
Yeah.
singers, all of them,
Yeah.
none of them were in Jerusalem.
Yeah, they actually left. They were like, hey, by the way, we really love our job. But again, it kind of seems like we do not have provisions for our lives. So we see them going back. That's the other problem that we see, total neglect of the temple. Then the other thing we see is a total neglect of the Sabbath.
Yeah.
These guys, their priorities now, we have to make money. So sales continue even on the Sabbath day. In fact, people actually sleep outside the wall, waiting for the doors to be open so that they can actually continue selling. Fish is coming from those different places like Tyre.
Yeah.
And the Sabbath seems like any other normal day. We are to continue doing business as usual.
There is no sacredness of the day of the Lord.
The day of the Lord is
we would
neglected.
say. Yeah.
And the day of the Lord becomes their day. The day for us to advance
our trade and make money.
and ensure that we advance.
In fact, I understand in a sense why Nehemiah is so angry. He has labored so hard to get these guys here.
Yeah.
And I think later on we'll look at chapter 10 and just see how he walked them all the way to the point where they even make a commitment that we will do these things.
Yeah.
And then he goes away just for a small time. And everything is in chaos.
Everything is
has been undone.
Yeah.
So we will look at some of the things he intentionally does. Some of the things mentioned there is for the temple, he reinstituted everything, tithes come back. He has to make sure that the worship of God is restated back to where it was. As you've mentioned, the issue of the Sabbath, he chases out the merchants. He tells them, by the way, Sabbath ni siwaone hapa. Mukikaribia hii, I will arrest you, by the way. And one or two times they try to come and sleep on the gates at waone ama watapenya. But the guy makes sure that Sabbath has been reinstated for real in Israel. Yeah. Maybe some of the other thing we observe there is the issue of neglecting the marriage covenant. It had been mentioned specifically that the people of God should not intermarry with the people of other tribes. And I'm not saying in a generic sense where never take anyone from any other tribe, because that again would not be reasonable. But that the people of God had to maintain a sacredness when it comes to especially marriages with other tribes. So, but I see this has been completely neglected. In fact, it is so bad that the grandson of Eliashib, the high priest of God,
is married to the daughter of Sanballat, the
really?
Horonite.
You see, Sanballat and Joiada, they are calling each other Shemeji.
Yeah.
Imagine, and this is the high priest's son
Yeah.
who has given his son to marry
Sanballat.
Sanballat's daughter. So
Yeah.
it's a very high level of neglect
Yeah.
that it makes Nehemiah so mad. He chases this guy out of the city.
Yeah.
He tells him, get away from here.
Yeah.
You and your family and son, kwendeni kabisa mujue mahali mutaenda.
That's true.
And then he says, God, remember these guys for the evil
Yeah.
they have done.
Yeah.
So he's so angry,
Yeah.
so agitated about
Yeah.
what these guys have undone,
Yeah.
what he had been
Yeah.
trying to do this whole time.
Yeah.
It is so bad with the marriages that these children are growing up
And
not even knowing
the language.
the language of
Yeah.
Hebrew.
Yeah, they actually they know the language of the Ashdod and other foreign
Imagine.
languages.
I think that's
Yeah.
the best thing. If you lose language, you lose culture. If you lose culture, you lose worship. The whole of the worship of Yahweh was based on the culture of the Hebrews.
Yeah.
Because we saw that it's a way of life that God has made them to be from the time of Moses.
Yeah.
And now,
And to teach and to pass it
Yes.
down to their children.
even the children don't know the language. How can they ever know the culture or even the God of Israel?
Yeah.
So it's a very, very strange thing. So let's look at the interpretation bit of this story.
Yeah.
And ask ourselves, we are seeing a lot of anger here with Nehemiah.
Nehemiah.
We have not seen
Why
this
is
side of him. The other times he's the guy who says, God,
Oh,
remember
Lord.
their threats,
Yeah,
protect us.
yeah.
Okay, to make a guard, but there's nowhere we've seen a confrontation
we
or
see
a fight.
action. The guy is pulling hairs. Beating people up, pulling hairs from their heads.
This
and telling them
guy-
to make an oath.
Imagine.
And
This-
throwing stuff from Tobias, stuff from the storeroom. That large room that he had created his cozy
Don't come
living.
and
Get
throw
out.
the knees
Yeah.
outside. We see him beating up grown men
Yeah.
who have given their daughters away in marriage.
Yeah. If chapter 13 would be a movie, it would make a really good sequel.
This is the you see Nehemiah
Yeah.
out of control.
Yeah.
So let's just look that,
Yeah.
and I would want us to contrast it with chapter 10 because in chapter 10 we see a lot of commitments that he had made to God,
Yeah.
and see just how they are undoing those commitments one by one.
Yeah.
That makes Nehemiah so angry.
That's true. I think the first thing that probably we can really see is
Yeah.
that Nehemiah's tone, attitude, and feeling is he's totally devastated.
Yeah.
One, this whole conversation, he's seen Jerusalem grow.
Yeah.
It was a subtle conversation in chapter 1. He has asked for
And rubble
resources.
in ruins, yeah.
And he's gotten all these resources. And he has experienced opposition. He has finished building the wall. These guys have prayed. Ezra has read the word and the law of God for like 6 hours. These guys have responded in celebrating the feasts that they've managed
Yeah.
to celebrate then. They have ended up confessing their sins to God.
They have
They
repopulated
have
Jerusalem.
prayed, made solid
Yeah.
prayers to God. In chapter 10, they land and they make an oath and an agreement of their holy and sacrifice to honor God in these specific ways. And in chapter 10, we actually see them saying that they actually separated themselves before making that oath.
Yes.
So the guys who actually made that oath in chapter 10 were the chosen people of God, the Israelites, the Jews.
Yeah.
But what we see here, we see them going against that.
The separation is gone.
The separation is gone. Actually, Tobiah, the person who was literally opposing the work of God, he is now living at the heart of Jerusalem
Yeah.
and enjoying his time there. And Tobiah, for us to remember in chapter 2, in Nehemiah chapter 2,
Yeah.
I think in verses 11, we are reminded that verses 10, he was actually an Ammonite.
Yes, it says Tobiah the Ammonite and Sanballat the Horonite. Yeah.
Yeah, so he is part of the foreign descent, and yet, apart from his opposition, he is now brought near.
The ones Moses said they should never.
And the reason why they should never is because they ended up not showing kindness to
Yeah.
Israel.
To Israel
They didn't
in
come
the
with
desert.
food and water
Yeah.
when Israel needed them most.
Yeah.
They actually went to the extent of coercing
Hiring
Balaam,
Balaam
who was a prophet, who was supposed to actually
to come and curse the
come and curse
the
God's
people
people.
of God.
And yet again, it's put in brackets there that our God, however, turned the curse into a blessing. Again, fulfilling the promises of Abraham.
Yeah.
that the people who
Those
will
who
actually,
curse you.
those who curse, the people of God will actually be cursed.
Yeah.
And those who actually bless the people of
We
God,
will be blessed.
they too will be blessed. So one of the things is that it's just striking and shocking is that ultimately we see
Eliashib.
Eliashib, a priest who was supposed to really guard the storehouses.
He's the one who is supposed
the
to know
one-
the law of Vizuri Sala, even what Moses said.
he's actually blinded by this association and is so far removed from keeping the law
Of
of
God.
Moses.
Yeah.
And separating himself from
Yeah,
the
fro-
Moabites,
from-
the Ammonites, and those who are not within the descent of the Jews
Of
in the
Israel.
lineage of Abraham.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And by this, we are not saying that there is no Moabite or Ammonite who ever joined the community of Israel.
Yeah,
We are just saying, by the time they were joining the community, and if you remember the story of Ruth,
yeah,
they have to have cleansed themselves
that's true.
and sort of left behind their way of life, their
Yeah.
gods, their
Yes,
worship
yes.
of idols, and have
by choice,
Yes.
and in faith, again,
Put-
following
exactly.
Yahweh. Yeah,
So they must have made a commitment to follow Yahweh,
Yeah.
so that they are brought into the congregation of the people of God. But there is no such thing we see with Tobiah. In fact, Tobiah is an opposer of the work of God.
Tobiah seems to have a true pass.
Yeah, so
Just gets in like
he's-
that.
How is he brought
Yeah.
in like that
Yeah.
to be given a furnished apartment in the temple, while a neglect of God's work and God's people goes on? Because
Yeah.
this room was supposed to store
Yeah.
the things of worship.
Yeah.
They're supposed to store
The
incense.
articles,
Yeah.
the grains,
Yes.
the new oil, and all the incense that was supposed to be used.
Exactly. When tithes are
yeah.
given for the Levites, they're supposed to be put in this
Yeah.
room. But Tobiah has a clear for Tobiah to make room for Tobiah. So you
Yeah.
can just see how far they had
Yeah.
gone to desecrate the house of God. Again, why Nani is so angry, why Nehemiah is so angry with this. So it's almost as if it is Tobiah versus the honor of God, and Tobiah has won.
Yeah.
Nehemiah,
Finally, I
Nehemiah-
know I didn't manage to,
Yeah.
to stop the building of the walls,
But guess what?
but here I am.
Nikondani.
Yeah.
Nikondani, I might have failed then, but now I
Yeah.
am winning. Yeah. The other thing I see, that when you talk about the neglect that is happening in the house of God, remember chapter 10, verse 39, they actually promise and they say, we will not neglect the house of our God. That's the very last verse of
Yeah.
chapter 10.
Yeah.
In fact, that whole place they have been talking about, from verse 37,
Yeah.
we will bring our new grain offerings, our wine offerings, the tithes we will provide for our Levites. They had promised that they will not neglect the house of God. But immediately the question that is striking here in chapter 13 is that he asks, how comes the house of the Lord is neglected?
Yeah.
So it's, and again, you read Malachi, it's almost as if it's the
Yeah.
whole thing. You have
Yeah.
neglected, you are
Yeah.
not bringing the tithes, and he will try to reinstate that. But one of the things he does is rebuke the leaders. You remember, it's the leaders who sealed the oath that
Yeah,
they
the
made
nobles,
in chapter 10.
Yeah.
So all of them were gathered, they said, we will do these things. The leaders wakakuja wakaeka
A seal of
seals,
agreement.
to the agreement. He calls them and says, what is this thing that you are doing?
Mm.
But thankfully, Nehemiah again reinstates this and puts in charge trustworthy men. He says, okay, one of the things I think we did a mistake is just leave this to the Nini of Eliashib,
Yeah.
because he's a high priest. So he gets some few good trustworthy men and puts them in charge of the storerooms, which I think was a very wise
Yeah.
thing for him
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah.
And again, we will look at the interpretive bit to just see that the neglect of the house of God had led to the neglect of the Levites and the singers.
That's true.
They had gone
That's
again,
true.
as you said,
Yeah.
gone back to their lands to go and farm. He brings them back and says, "Come back, continue with the work that God has called you to do.
Yeah.
You will be provided for." And later on, we will see tithes coming, almost as if guys now start again giving,
Yeah.
and the Levites are provided for again adequately.
Yeah. The other interpretation right here is just looking at the issue of Sabbath.
Yeah.
In chapter 13, these guys have no regard
None.
for Sabbath. Actually, the activities that it's a busy Sabbath for. I mean, we see them loading the donkeys together with the wines, the grapes, the figs.
Everything.
We see them actually moving. They're bringing all these things to Jerusalem on the Sabbath, and they are selling them on this very, very day.
Yeah.
In chapter 10, verses 30,
Yeah.
verses
The-
29,
It was that one.
verse 31, actually, they said, when the neighboring peoples bring merchandise or grain to sell on the Sabbath, we will not buy from them on the Sabbath or on any holy day. Every 7th year, we will forego working the land and we will cancel all debts. So they have already made a covenant, even if there was a temptation. For these guys from Tyre,
Yeah.
there's a guys from Tyre here who,
We are bringing
men from Tyre who bring fish.
omena.
Even
Yeah.
if they bring it at their doorsteps,
We will not.
wacha warudi nazo. That's the agreement that they made. But again, a few verses later, these guys go ahead and neglect the Sabbath.
Yes.
They do not have regard for it. They go ahead and make it their day at the expense of honoring God.
Yeah.
Instead of them going to the house of God and resting and giving of sacrifices and tithes and honoring and worshiping Yahweh, they have resulted back to them making wealth for themselves
Yeah.
and selling their grain, which in essence they end up disobeying the very, very covenant
Command
that
of
God
God.
had set out for them
Yeah.
in the book of law of Moses, but also the same agreement,
Yeah.
because in chapter 10 they sat down together and made oaths
Yes.
and made vows that this is what we, the people of Israel, everyone who was able to understand the book of the law, appended their willingness that this is what we will do. We will observe the Sabbath
Yeah.
and keep it holy. And here we see something totally different. Them
Yeah.
following a different path and dishonoring the Sabbath.
It-
And
yeah.
Nehemiah goes ahead and responds to this. And his response doesn't look to be very, very
Yes.
peaceful. He does not go there
He's
with,
not a diplomat.
he doesn't do any level of negotiations. He goes ahead and asks great questions and asks them, why are you doing the same things that our forefathers did?
Yeah.
And why are you going ahead and doing the same thing and bringing calamity upon this
Upon
city?
ourselves.
And he goes ahead to even say, now you are stirring up more wrath against Israel by desecrating
The
the
Sabbath.
Sabbath.
Yeah. In fact, it's the
Yeah.
same culprit sin.
Yeah.
One of the sins that is mentioned in the book of Jeremiah. For why God sent these guys to exile.
Yeah.
Because they were doing this exact thing that we are talking about
Yeah.
here. Neglecting the Sabbath. It's one of the things that God was accusing them of.
Yeah.
On the Sabbath, you have not rested. The year of Jubilee, you are not allowing the land to rest. He actually said, I will send you to exile for 70 years.
Yeah.
To recover all those years that you were supposed to let the land rest, and you did not.
Yeah.
So he says the land will be left desolate
Yeah.
for 70 years.
Yeah.
That it may recover. Si hizo masabat zote mmekuwa mkikataa kupeana every 7th year. Sawa. Mutaenda exile na the land will breathe.
A mandatory Sabbath.
Yes, a mandatory Sabbath.
yeah.
So it almost is a neglecting of the same here. And I also remember there's a guy who will be as indignant and angry about the house of God and this trade on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
Many years later.
Yeah. Jesus.
He walks into the temple and finds these guys trading. And almost in a similar sense of what Nehemiah is experiencing here.
Yeah.
Anacharaza watu sana akiwafukuzanga out of the temple.
Yeah, actually, it's quite interesting that he went ahead and ordered the doors to be shut and not to be opened until the day of Sabbath is over. He ended up stationing new men on the gates.
Yeah.
And once or twice the merchants and sellers of all kinds of goods spent the night outside. There are those who walikuwa wanasimama pale nje wanasema, hey, we are waiting for this. He actually told them,
He threatens them.
if you do this again, I will lay hands on you. The laying hands here is not the one that you are supposed to be prayed for. It is not may the Lord bless you and keep you. No, this was
I will put
a
you
tactical laying hand on you that adds pain.
We saw the laying of hands later on here with the marriages that we talk about.
So we actually see a holy indignation that Nehemiah has to the purity, first of all, of keeping the law of God, but also with the hindsight of we had made so much progress.
Yeah.
Why should we walk back?
How are we undoing this?
Why are we undoing the very, very commands that you guys actually decided to obey?
Yeah.
Why are you desecrating the Sabbath?
Yeah.
And again, the Sabbath rest was a big thing for them.
Yeah.
Because it also reminded them, actually, God created.
And on the 7th day, he
on the
rested.
7th day, he rested.
Yeah.
But again, they were pretty much desecrating what God had given them.
Yeah.
Keeping the Sabbath was part of the law the 10 commandments that were given by Moses. So them desecrating this, it was a big thing. It was actually telling God that they would rather make money
You have gone back to the
than
same
actually
things.
look to you and worship you.
Yeah. Wow. The last thing here we saw is the issue of intermarriage. And the children, this is striking. Children not knowing Hebrew actually angered Lali so much, Nehemiah. He caught those fathers, akawatwanga, akawangoa nywele. You know, by the time someone is holding your hair to pull it out, this is an angry man.
Yeah.
Because he was wondering, how comes, even in the basic thing, children who are living in your own house are not speaking the language of your fathers? How have you fallen so far to not see the responsibility God has given you to carry forward the faith to the next generation? And it's because of these intermarriages that you are doing, so that if they don't know the language, and for that reason they obviously don't know the promises of God. They obviously don't know the covenant that God has with Israel. So we're actually bringing up heathen in Jerusalem in the name of the people of God. So he was so angry with them, and I understand his anger here. He actually feels this neglect in the highest level. And then he quotes something that happened many years later in the issue of Solomon, and says, this is the same thing that made Solomon fall. The guy was anointed by God. He was loved by God.
He had wisdom.
Exactly. God gave him Israel. Then he was led astray by foreign women to worship foreign gods. And he's like, you are doing the very same thing. Look, guys, you will be led, you are being led astray, and our children are being led astray because of the sin that you have done of intermarrying. Never mind that these guys had promised they will not intermarry in chapter 10. They actually are doing the very same thing they had said to do. Let's look at the interpretive bit, the applicative bit of this of this thing, and start with the issue of separation. These guys have not separated themselves. But what does that mean for us today? So should we kick out anyone who is not Kenyan from our Kenyan church?
Really? I think the separation here is you setting yourself apart, setting Christ as Lord in your heart, and always being willing and ready to actually defend the faith that you have. And the kind of separation here that the Old Testament prophets, Moses, and each and every prophet who actually followed on was, once you brought yourself into their community, there was much more interaction. And the interaction here would not really cause you to influence them, but it would pretty much cause them to influence you more. You would actually worship their gods. You would actually start participating in their pagan rituals. You'd end up
becoming like them,
getting their culture and becoming like them. In our current context, God has called us to be the salt and light. So once we walk into this world today, we definitely walking into the dark world. And therefore, our interaction with the world should be us shining forth the light of the gospel of Christ in our world today, rather than the darkness stifling the light
that is in us,
and causing that light actually to grow dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. It should be the other way around. So the wisdom here is we are not really called to not interact with those who do not know God. In essence, God has actually called us to go ahead and reach out to them, to build meaningful friendships that would cause them to know God, to love Him. Because again, the New Testament way of display of our Christian faith is not, I am a Christian because my name is Jacob, so I descend from the lineage of Abraham. But our certainty of the faith that we have in Christ is through the descent of Christ, saving us as Gentiles and enjoining us, we who are without the promises of the covenant, without God, without hope. And by so doing, us displaying the love of God actively and passionately and visibly to our dark world. And that might involve there are friends that you'd actually meet and be with them, but you might not fully engage in all activities.
So we are not becoming like them.
We are not becoming like them. We are, in one way or another, shining forth the gospel of Christ to them, that it would be visible to them that we are
Yes.
actually different.
Yes.
And most times when that happens in our current context, is people will actually ask you, why do you do this?
Yeah.
Why is this your
Yeah.
approach to life issues and life questions and life challenges? And that question right there shows you that, by the way, we might be friends, but we are
But
actually
still
not.
not,
not.
we are not relating in the way that I am trying to
Yeah.
emulate you or become like
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
There's something curious that Jesus says when he says, unless you are ready to hate your mother and father,
Yes.
uh,
Yes.
to break
Yeah.
or to
Even
honor,
your own life.
Yes.
Yeah.
To honor God, the relationship you have with God, above the relationship you have with your friends or with your family. One of the things that I see with Tobiah here,
Yeah.
he's closely related with Eliashib. Eliashib, even though as a high priest, becomes influenced to the level of dishonoring God in an attempt to please his friend
Yeah,
Tobiah.
in an attempt to help. Probably, we don't know
Yeah.
whether Tobiah did have a house.
So, yeah, the guy was rich. He was an influencer. So
Yeah, he
you should-
definitely.
But
Yeah.
it almost feels like Eliashib honored his friend Tobiah,
Yeah.
or however closely related we are not sure, more than he honored God. And sometimes having that very close relationship with those that are not God seekers, or those who are
Yeah.
not of the same faith as us, can cause us to dishonor God in an attempt to please them. Some of the obvious examples are your friend wants a deal, and you
To
have
cut.
to cut corners,
Yeah.
and because you are business associates, na yeye yako sawa na hii deal, kupeana ako ka bribe, unasema okay, unajua mimi ni Christian,
Yeah.
but I want to please my friend, and I forget the honor of God,
Yeah.
and I end up going into sin so that I may please my friend
Yeah.
and dishonor God. Sometimes there is a level of close relationship that we must dissect and actually separate ourselves so that we maintain the honor of God, as opposed to doing an evil thing like Eliashib did here, for which he is rebuked.
True.
But the other thing I see with it, especially this neglect of the house of God, later on, and I think Nehemiah should have done this from the
Yeah.
point go, there are trustworthy men he takes to steward over the resources
Yeah.
of God. And I don't know whether you or I have been put in charge of the resources of God's house. Maybe it's not even at the church itself, but maybe wherever you are, God has placed you in a place where you are responsible for the resources that are supposed to bring God glory.
Yeah.
These guys, because of Eliashib trying to honor Tobiah, he neglects the worship of God, and he also neglects the people of God, because the Levites go hungry
Yeah.
in an attempt for him to
Yeah.
spare a room there.
Yeah.
In fact, they go back to working. All of Israel sort of just desecrates and stops bringing even the tithes
Yeah.
in the house of
Yeah.
God, which is a very, very sad affair. But I like how Nehemiah comes and puts trustworthy men to take care of. Are you a trustworthy man?
Yeah.
Sometimes we are looking for elders in the church, and we say, let's see trustworthy men who can be given to steward over the resources of God's house. And question is, are you trustworthy? The point that we can trust you, whether it is with the ministry roles or
Yeah.
even with the giving of God's people.
Yeah.
So, and the question to ourselves,
Yeah.
are we trustworthy
Yeah.
that when God gives us resources and says, these are the resources of my people, I want you to take charge over them, can we be trusted to do that rightly by God?
True.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah.
The other application is also for this Sabbath theme.
Yes.
This Sabbath theme.
Yes.
One of the things that at the heart of it was an issue of priority. These guys, the Israelites, prioritized selling their businesses above
Coming to the house of God for worship.
coming to the house of God in worship. So they decided to trade off. I mean, should we really go to God's house, or should we actually make
Yeah.
money and continue trading? And I think for us in our current context, I know we are busy people. I mean, there's this whole rat race.
Yes.
And again
Make it-
fueled by envy, as as Reverend John reminded
Kuomoka,
us.
yes,
Yeah, I
yeah.
need to omoka. I need to make it. I need to have something tangible, at least under my name, to
Eh.
show around that truly,
Yeah.
Badeke, the Lord is with you,
Yes.
and that if He loves you and if He gives
He
good
has
gifts to
given me-
men,
I
He
am
can.
part of,
Wacha hizo vitu zipitie mikononi mwako.
Yes.
And in that regard, we end up into this whole rat race of neglecting not only our personal relationship with God, our daily devotion to Him, our communal gathering of believers to worship Him and to pray to Him, but also even to the greater extent, even neglecting our relationships and the responsibilities and the various vows and commitments that we have. These guys had made a serious commitment to God that this is what we're going to do. We're not going to neglect the house of God. We will give tithes. And they went to the extent of saying, I'm going to give a third of a shekel. There was clear instructions on their commitment to God. But we find them here callous about their commitment to God. We see them focusing on other things, the things of this world, and treasuring those things above the worship of God.
Yeah.
And just a take home for us, in what ways have we substituted our honoring, our delight, worship, and total surrender to God above the things that we want to pursue?
Yeah.
And in what ways have we failed to rest? Because again, the whole idea in our pursuit of either power, achievement,
money,
wealth, or status,
yeah,
or legacy, in what ways have we done that? And and my prayer is that God would realign our priorities, that we would actually put Him first, and that everything that follows thereafter will actually be done to the honor and glory of Him.
In fact, as you asked that, the rebuke that was coming in my head is, so why don't I do regular family devotions with my family? Jobs, I get home late. So why don't I wake up early in the morning I need to rush to work. Why don't I set apart the Sabbath to just reflect on God? You know, there's some work I need to catch up with, or some deal I need to go and close. It almost feels as if every time we neglect the worship of God, it's because there's something that we need to do to bring money to ourselves, which is so sad from the example here. Finally, let's talk about the issue of intermarriage. Now, I know the issue of being unequally yoked. It is following us, even from the time of, and we're not saying that they were not supposed to marry from maybe Moab or Ammon. We're just saying that the Moabite who is being married into the culture of the Israelites has to have given up their idol worship and the ways of the Ammonites, that they may become a true Israel in heart. That when you come to get married here, like Ruth, you are saying, your God will be my God. Nimeshamalizana na watu wangu. I am here because of the worship of God. And in our day-to-day, sometimes we will say, okay, I'll marry this guy because he's a good guy. I know he's not a believer, but guys, this is the unequally yoked that led Solomon to sinning against God. Trust you me, in marriage, there is an intimacy that is so amazing and so beautiful that if one of you does not believe in the worship of God, don't think for a minute that you're the one who is going to influence them away from the world. Most likely, 99.9% of the times, you are the one who is pulled to sin, as opposed to you pulling them to righteousness. And God is the one who saves. It is not you who saves. So the moment you put that responsibility on you that I will influence them to God, who tells you that you can save anyone? So I think the issue of being unequally yoked must be emphasized even now. Because our marriage to people who are not believers will lead us to sinning against God. Period. It will lead us to sinning against God. So Nehemiah finishes with the issue of remember me. What do you think about it?
I think, first of all, he says it, 4 times. He says, remember me for this, oh my God, and do not blot out what I have so faithfully done for the house of my God and its services. He reflects on, I've done all this. Remember me. Because he feels, in a sense, I have put my mind into this. I've put my life. I have made this my one ambition to see the worship of Yahweh coming back to Jerusalem and the disgrace of Jerusalem and God's people being removed. And he comes back and finds the total opposite.
Seen and done.
And he goes ahead and say, God, remember me. I've done all I could. I know I have tried, and I will still try. He doesn't give up. He doesn't leave this
still continuing to do.
And he kind of says this, remember me, after each and every reform that he makes. He goes ahead to say again, remember me for this also, oh my God, and show mercy to me according to your great love. After the whole drama happening and realizing these guys have neglected the Sabbath, he goes ahead, and the something that we need to also learn from him is that amidst, when he was praying, when he was starting the job, he still prays.
Yeah.
When he desired to make a bullet prayer,
He prays.
he still prays. When he wants to make a long prayer, he goes ahead and makes a long, spontaneous, and structured prayer to God. Later on, what we see is that he goes ahead and makes these short prayers right here out of anger and anguish and devastation of, did my efforts really matter?
Really count for
Did
anything?
it count? And is there hope? After doing all this, is there hope for these guys? But again, he goes ahead in verses 29, it says, remember them. Now he moves from remember me to making a prayer for them. Remember them, oh my God. Because this is what they've done. They've defiled the priestly office and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. And then he ends with, again, remember me. Remember me with favor, oh my God. Ending it and capping it at, this is what I've done. I gave my mind, my heart.
It seems it was not enough.
And even when I came back and found that these guys had moved away from this whole space, this is my prayer. Oh God, remember me.
Yeah.
And this book ends with this anticlimax of, okay, so these guys had made a commitment. They had made an
They have
oath.
broken the whole commitment.
But yet they've broken the whole commitment. It kind of pushes us back and raises the big question. Granted that this is the last book in the Old Testament chronologically.
What hope is there?
What hope is there? Can we ever, left to ourselves, even with the full knowledge of the law, the full knowledge of the promises of God, with a full understanding of what he has done, with a full and a total repentance that comes with sorrow and anguish before God, and with a total agreement filled with a seal, is that enough? And can we totally and truly obey God out of our own commitment and oaths and vows that we will say, by the way, this year, this is what I'm going to do? And that leaves us with the sure hope that left to ourselves, the law, us knowing what the law does, us having a full knowledge of what we have committed ourselves to, us putting a seal with the nobles and with the people and with the community, choosing to serve God, left to ourselves, we will break the same covenant over and over again.
That's such an anticlimax, I think. The reminder of just sin is dwelling in us. And again, left to ourselves, we will sin against God 10, 100, 1,000 times. But thanks be to God that the New Testament comes after the book of Nehemiah. That even though Nehemiah is saying, remember me, because this looks like a worthless effort, Christ is coming. And even though he will also cry with many cries on the cross, he is not neglected. In fact, he is the plan that God provides as an answer to Nehemiah, where he remembers Nehemiah and changes us completely. So it's a reminder that left to ourselves, we can never please God. And the whole book just ends with that anticlimax. And I think that's the right place for us to be. Hopefully the next time we'll look at a New Testament hopeful book that will raise our hope to see, oh my goodness, Nehemiah left at an anticlimax. And now God picks it up to say, I have done something about that. 400 years later. Praise be to God. Amen. Thank you, guys. It's been an enjoyable time. I hope you have enjoyed as well the 13 chapters. I know today's session was a bit long, but I hope you've had a good time. I hope Nehemiah has been helpful to your faith and to your walk journey. So, and I trust that even as we start the next series, perhaps a bit later on, you will join us and we will continue to fellowship together. Well, David, maybe some final remarks as we close.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us. It was an amazing journey for us, just doing this book together. But again, our prayer is that through the life of Nehemiah, we would not only learn more about what God can do through his people, but how a holy ambition can start from a subtle conversation and end up doing great things. So as whatever space you are in, may you do your job and do what God has called you to do with great diligence and faithfulness. And above all else, even in moments when your efforts end up with such an anticlimax, may you remember that God still knows you, still has the best interests, and sees your efforts, and he's not unjust. He will reward you, And he will still, in his own time, bring another person, hopefully, to continue and carry on the work that God probably allowed you to do.
Yeah.
So, barikiwa sana. Thank you for joining us. Looking forward to the next time. We do not know, we yet to know where we will camp next. Pastor Madenge will ably lead us there. But meanwhile, have a good time. And feel free just to rewatch the episodes. If you're catching us on this last episode, there's a couple more episodes on our page. Just click the playlist part and listen to the Nawiri playlist.
Asante sana. Have a nice weekend.